Welcome. So how exactly do you build the next billion-dollar business? I mean, it's a massive question, right? Well, today in this explainer, we're going to figure that out by looking at the mental models of billionaire entrepreneur Peter Thiel. Originally, this was his ultimate goal when teaching his students at Stanford University. He wanted to give them the exact frameworks to step out into the real world and create incredibly valuable, genuinely world-changing companies.
You see, his teachings were so groundbreaking that one of his students, a guy named Blake Masters, started taking these intensely detailed notes of the lectures. And those notes, they were so effective that they actually started spreading way beyond the university campus. They spread like wildfire, eventually going completely global. Seeing this massive impact, Peter and Blake teamed up to refine those notes into a book so people everywhere could tap into this knowledge. And that brings us right to the core principles we are unpacking today from 0 to 1.
Okay, let's dive into this. First up, we'll look at going from 0 to 1. Second, why competition is toxic. Third, the power of monopoly. And finally, how to dominate the small pond.
Let's jump right into section 1, going from 0 to 1, and rethinking progress.
Now, you might be wondering, what's the fundamental difference between just copying what works and actually inventing the future? Imagine you're back in the day when everyone got around by horse. If you decide to start a business breeding, say, slightly faster horses, or building a slightly better horse carriage, you are making what Thiel calls horizontal progress. You're just going from 1 to N. You're taking something that already exists and just tweaking it. But if instead of a better carriage, you invent an entirely new, never-before-seen mode of transportation, like Henry Ford creating the automobile out of nowhere, that is vertical progress. You are going from 0 to 1. You're doing something totally, absolutely original.
And this hits on a pretty tough reality in the business world. Every major event, it literally only happens once. If you're just copying things that have already been built and putting a slight spin on them, your chances of massive success drop significantly. I mean, sure, you might find a little success, but it won't be huge, and it definitely won't last. Think about it like this. The next Bill Gates is not going to build a new operating system. The next Mark Zuckerberg won't create another social network. And the next Larry Page isn't going to build a search engine. If you're just copying exactly what these tech giants did, you're missing the point. They achieved incredible success precisely because they went from 0 to 1. Directly copying them, well, that just guarantees limited horizontal progress.
Moving on to section 2, why competition is toxic, or as Thiel puts it, the poison of the business world.
Now, I know this totally challenges what society conditions us to believe from a really young age. We live in a world that constantly praises competition, right? In school, we compete for grades, then we graduate and compete for jobs, and sometimes we even end up competing with our neighbors over who has the better car. But Peter Thiel throws a huge contrarian curveball here. He argues that in business, competition is basically poison. In fact, he says competition and capitalism are actually exact opposites. Think about it. Capitalism is all about generating and keeping profits. Competition, on the other hand, is completely focused on destroying them. The more competition you have in your market, the less profit you'll actually keep, regardless of how massive your operation is.
To put that into perspective, just think about this single tiny number, 37 cents. Back in 2012, U.S. airline companies were pulling in hundreds of billions in revenue. It's a massive, sprawling industry. But because the airline industry is so hyper-competitive, with companies constantly, frantically undercutting each other just to survive, all those potential profits were completely wiped out. At the end of the day, their profit margin was a microscopic 37 cents per passenger. 37 cents. That is the devastating real-world reality of a highly competitive market.
Which brings us nicely to section 3, the power of monopoly, which is true capitalism in action.
So how on earth do you escape this low-margin trap? Well, you build a monopoly. Now hold on, when we say monopoly here, we aren't talking about illegal trusts or bad corporate behavior like bullying people out of business. We are defining it as owning a market so completely that you effectively have no real competitors left. You've created something so uniquely valuable, so far beyond anything else out there, that competition is essentially irrelevant. Take Google, for example. In the realm of search engines, Google is an absolute monopoly. If you need to look something up online, you almost certainly just go to Google without a second thought.
And this brilliantly illustrates the point. When you put them side by side, the financial difference is just staggering. Take a look at this comparison from 2012. You have the U.S. airlines swimming in a highly competitive market, bringing in an astronomical $160 billion in revenue. But their profitability? Yep, that miserable 37 cents per passenger. Now compare that to Google, operating as a monopoly. They had a much smaller overall revenue pool, $50 billion, but they kept a massive 21% profit margin. Having a monopoly allows you to actually generate and keep real wealth, simply because you aren't bleeding your resources dry fighting off daily rivals.
All right, our final chapter, Section 4, Dominate the Small Pond, which is all about your scaling strategy.
So how do you actually go about building one of these monopolies? It really boils down to a very simple yet incredibly powerful metaphor. It is far better to be a big fish in a small pond than a small fish in a vast ocean. If you jump straight into a massive, generalized market with huge established players, you're just a tiny fish. And you know what happens to tiny fish in the ocean? They get eaten alive. To build a billion-dollar business, you absolutely must start by finding a small pond, a very specific, targeted niche, and making yourself the absolute biggest fish there.
Now, what's really interesting about this strategy is how it plays out in the real world. Let's look at Amazon. Today, Amazon is this absolute behemoth that sells literally everything from A to Z, the whole shebang. But Jeff Bezos didn't start out trying to boil the ocean. He started with a very specific, totally tiny niche, selling books. He focused all his company's energy on becoming the undisputed, absolute best place to buy books online. He totally dominated that small pond. Only after capturing that monopoly did Amazon slowly start expanding into adjacent markets, like CDs and DVDs. Step by step, they moved from their small pond into a lake and eventually into the vast ocean where they dominate today.
And you know, we see this exact same playbook with PayPal, which Peter Thiel himself actually co-founded. PayPal didn't try to get the entire world to use their service on day one. No way! They focused intensely on a tiny, super specific user base, people buying and selling on eBay. By targeting just those users, they managed to completely dominate that mini ecosystem, becoming the go-to primary payment method. Once they owned that small market completely, they finally had the foundation and the strength to expand outward and conquer payments across the rest of the internet.
So, what should you really take away from all this? It's a complete paradigm shift in how you view progress and business. Grinding out horizontal progress and fighting for scraps in a highly competitive market, that just won't lead to outsized success. To build the next billion-dollar business, you need vertical progress. You need to go from 0 to 1. You must target a small niche, dominate it completely, and build a monopoly from the ground up. I want to leave you with this provocative thought to chew on today. When you look at your own goals and your own projects, are you competing for tiny margins in a bloody ocean, or are you going from 0 to 1 and building a brand new pond?